Hello again, and welcome to the second part of professional communication in computing. In this second part, we are focusing on ethics and communication. These two concepts are interlinked, and I hope I can demonstrate effectively how and why. In the first part, we focus on communication skills, how to write a good report, how to speak, how to create a speech that is effective, is engaging. In this lecture, I will explain why ethical communication is essential to your professional practice. It's about preventing harm, building trust, and ensuring fairness. By the end of this session, you should be able to recognize why communication is central to ethical computing, identify common barriers, and also be able to practice strategies for communicating effectively with different audiences. Let's start with a case study. Actually, two case studies. The first one is the case for Boeing 737 MAX. You may remember, two planes crashed and they were linked. The failure was linked to software issues. But what made this a communication problem, and why I think it's interesting for this lecture, is because the problem was that engineers seemed to know about the risks, yet these risks were not clearly communicated to regulators or pilots. The results was two tragic accidents where many people died. And if we move to a different example, similarly, Uber's self-driving car accident in 2018 highlighted similar issues, how safety reports were not fully shared with regulators. In these two cases, what role did communication or miscommunication played here? Communication is not only about making things sound nice and clever, it's about ethical responsibility to colleagues, to users, to the public, to clients. Try to remember this. Say what you mean and mean what you say. Here are some steps for effective and ethical communication: responsibility, accountability, and professionalism. So you are now familiar with both the ACM and the BCS codes. So professional codes of ethics, like these two, highlights communication. The ACM code of ethics, for instance, requires honesty and transparency. The BCS code emphasizes accountability and respect. So both assume that you can communicate risks and responsibilities clearly and effectively. Poor communication can cause as much harm as poor coding. Let's break down communication. There is an academic discipline called science communication, and if we go back in history, we can see a very classic model, Shannon and Weber, from 1948, that says basically that communication happens in a linear way. You have a sender that sends a message through a specific channel to a receiver, and noise can interfere, jargon, language barriers, assumptions. If the message is distorted or unclear, ethical risks increase. Miscommunication can cost life, reputation, billions and billions of pounds. So this, keep in mind this very simple linear model of communication. So communication models have since then evolved, and we have here 6 examples, and they move from more linear, more simplistic ways of understanding how information flows, how information is transmission, to more complex. So the second model, transactional, is a time where interaction, different actors were more taken into account. The key idea is that information and communication is around mutual exchange. Therefore, understanding and feedback were key elements to study. We move to the Habermas model in 84, that's a bit more philosophical, is more about communication and rationality, about how do we convey truth, transparency, fairness. The dialogic model of communication is more about relationships, it's a relational, it's two ways, it's about building trust between different actors and focus on accountability and listening. The social constructivist model is more about interpretation. It's about co-creating meaning, and as you can imagine, context and cultural sensitivity is crucial because it's all about interpreting, and your interpretation may change depending on which context you are. Network society focus on the digital systems that were new at that time. It's all about distributed network systems responsibilities. And while Shannon and Weber, the pioneer researcher that started talking about theory and communications, gave us an amazing foundation, no? The sender, the channel, the receiver, the noise. Recent theories extend that in ways critical for computer ethics. For example, the technology-mediated communication competence recognizes that many of our professional interactions are now fully or partly mediated. So now we work virtual teams, remote work, hybrid teams. So it is about having the competence to choose appropriate channels, appropriate technique, digital tech. The idea is how you choose that digital channels that are able to sustain trust, provide meaningful feedback, and manage relationships, even when not face-to-face. Yeah. So ethics is essential, specifically when that face-to-face is not possible. So it means communication can lead not only to projects delays, but misunderstanding about responsibilities, risks, and accountability. Then there is the communication visibility model. And as you can imagine, in digital system, it matters what is visible, logs, metadata, comments, but often we often think only about what is said. But what is it that is recorded, auditable, discoverable, is also very important. So we have the visible and the invisible, and all that pieces of information are important for effective communication. Design, decision, or platform policies might hide decision-making or reveal maybe too much, which impacts again in privacy, accountability, and power. Yeah, how much information is visible in a system is something that can create power asymmetries. Who is able to access specific information and who not. Finally, models like semantic or task-oriented communication push us beyond, did the information get across? Or, so it moved us from, did actually said what I wanted to say, to what meaning are we actually transferring? And what's the goal of the communication? What is the intention? Yeah, it's not about a linear, so I have a bit of information that needs to arrive to a recipient, but is, what do we mean? What are the meanings of that communication? What is the goal? What are the intentions? So in AI, in data science, etc., ethics demands that we make those meanings, that context, and the goals very explicit, very clear. What assumptions are in place, whose meanings are prioritized, what interpretations might be possible or misleading. Yes, so we're moving to a more task semantic oriented communication. I think this is all fascinating, that there is so much interest and research on communication science. So which core skills are maybe required for communication? So ethical communication in computing isn't just about speaking well, it's about also integrity. Practice these core skills to improve your communication. Yeah, you're gonna have to create this 5-minute pitch see if you can engage in some of those concepts. Which of those skills you think it feels the hardest? And probably that's the one you may need to practice the more. Clarity, active listening, empathy, documenting, reporting, also cultural sensitivity, which are the values of the other, of the person receiving the message. So it's so important to not only respect differences, but also to adapt the message so it can be accessed by others. So I also wanted to mention a bit about non-verbal communication. So in 1975, psychologists were starting to study body language. They felt, specifically in therapeutic context, it was so important. And the solar theory by Egan focused on specific features that were more likely to lead to successful interactions. So the solar theory focused on 5 specific elements. So sit, square, and this can be useful for you for your interviews or engaging with clients. So the idea is to sit squarely, opposite each other, open posture, never crossing arms or legs, lean a little slightly forwards to show interest, eye contact, be relaxed, because the other person will mirror that relaxation. In Nottingham University in 2011, our colleague Theo Stickley, he revised the solar theory, again in the therapeutic context, and made a few modifications. He said it maybe instead of sitting square, sit at an angle. There's evidence that show that improves communication, maybe it's not so direct. Uncross legs and arms, relax, eye contact. And then he added touch and intuition. And I think that are very interesting elements to enhance your communication. Obviously, in some contexts, touching someone's hand or shoulder may not be appropriate. But intuition is very interesting because in a way, when you are communicating with someone, what you are doing is connecting. So I'll leave that ideas with you. So again, another reflection. Have you ever seen tech products, markets, in a misleading way? And what ethical problems could that create? So these are some of the pitfalls we see when communication is not effective. Maybe you are withholding information, you're not telling all the risks. Maybe you're exaggerating the benefits. Maybe there is bias in documentation because some groups are excluded because maybe they cannot access the terminology, is too complex, too technical. Whistleblowing is another very interesting communication style where ethical choices means that you have to stand against authority and declare or denounce specific issues. And I want to finish this second part thanking you for watching all this. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned about communication. And remember that a poorly written line of code might crash a program, but a poorly communicated message can actually crash a company, a career, can cost lives. So reflect again on this action plan. This very easy to engage 4 different points. Very important, be transparent is very key for ethical communication. Train your skills. Revisit part 1. Be clear, be honest, be inclusive when communicating, and follow the codes, the ethical codes, where there is a focus on transparency, on honesty. And with this, I'll close this second lecture. These are the suggested reading, and I will upload the case study for the radiation machine and the Boeing crash in Moodle. And these are some of the references I used to prepare this second part. Thank you so much, and I'll see you soon in the workshop. Bye.